Today we're talking all about the Immersive Web, WebXR, and the future of WebVR with Amir Bozorgzadeh. So let's get to it. You are listening to the How to Create VR podcast, weekly conversations with VR and AR professional creators, designers, and producers. Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Create VR podcast, where I speak with professional creators, designers, developers, and producers who work on VR, AR, and MR projects. I'm Marcelo, a VR and AR developer, evangelist, and the guy behind howtocreatevr.com. My guest today is Amir Bozorgzadeh, co-founder and CEO of Virtuleap, and the host of the global WebXR hackathon. Today we'll be speaking about the Immersive Web, WebXR, and the future of the web and VR. But before we begin our conversation, I would like to thank our good friends at VR for sponsoring this episode. Thanks to their support, I'm able to continue to create great content to share with you. VR allows you to easily share your 360-degree photos and videos with the entire world. Plus, they now have a VR experience that lets you build 360-degree tours easily. You can access VR through the web, mobile, and all major VR platforms. You can check them out at howtocreatevr.com/VR. Make sure you use this URL so that they know I sent you there. Alrighty, bills are paid. So Amir, welcome.
Thanks, Marcelo.
Glad to have you here. Thank you for being on my podcast. We're going to be talking today a lot about WebVR, WebXR, Immersive Web, whatever they're calling it now. We keep changing that and we'll get into that. But before we jump into all of that, give us a little bit about your background.
I hail from Vancouver, Canada, but I've been an expat living abroad. I think it's approaching 10 years now as of the coming October. I've been living and working in places like Dubai and Amsterdam, and I'm now located in Lisbon, Portugal. My background initially started in digital research and then turned into mobile games publishing. And then about a few years ago, when I started writing more and more for blogs like VentureBeat and TechCrunch, I basically slipped into, I guess, a gravitational pull that is the mixed reality industry.
So what pushed you into that? How did you gravitate into that? Did you try a VR experience and you said, that's it, I'm hooked? Or how did you slip into that?
Yeah, when I started pulling my market research kind of, I love to quantify everything. I love, research and data and everything, pulling it. And then when I started writing about it, I had to make stories out of them. And it starts contextualizing where all these kind of different, things are happening in emerging tech and how it's converging with esports, how it's converging with games, and all these little dots started, plotting in my head. And then VR triggered me. And of course, AR, the whole spectrum of mixed reality. It triggered me because I suppose I see it as a kind of like the end game. It's kind of like the next level, the upgrade to where all these emerging technologies are kind of converging into one another.
Do you see this as the fourth wave, like everybody's calling it? We had desktop computing, the internet, mobile, and now VR, XR. Do you see it as a fourth wave?
I do. I think the fourth wave is a good description of it. It's not so much this picture I have of the oasis of Ready Player One, although it kind of is. I'm also a fan of the concepts like the singularity and all these types of things. So I kind of hesitate to really answer what is the fourth wave. There's a lot of cool novels, the sci-fi novels about depicting alternative ways of looking at how, the next 20 years will be. But I suppose I almost feel like I am very naive on how that will go about. But at this current stage, I suppose what I'm so excited about with all of this technology that represents this fourth wave is how it will suddenly, hopefully, really start to impact and allow us to transcend all sorts of barriers. I think even with all the technology that we have right now, we still kind of succumb to.
Expand on that a little bit. What do you mean by barriers? What kind of barriers do you think this VR will break down? I mean, I have my own personal thoughts on that, but I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah. So like an example would be I was at the World VR Forum in Switzerland, early June, first week of June, and they had this Birdly simulator. It was basically a contraption, an apparatus that I would come into, strap into, and allows me to flap my wings. I'm basically, morphing into a bird with this VR pod. And suddenly I'm transported above the skylines of New York City, and I'm hovering and floating and soaring. And unfortunately for me, the first minute I wasn't breathing. My wife had to walk over and tell me to breathe because I have a fear of heights. This is the kind of limitations. I have certain personal kind of psychological barriers, or maybe physical barriers, or conceptual, societally enforced barriers. And I think VR, in terms of education, in terms of therapeutic applications, that's particularly where my head goes. I think I have some, particular aims that just seem most natural for the technology, but that's the kind of things that I'm trying to approach with the technology. Is how does it allow us to, through exposure in a way that we've never been able to be exposed in certain environments, through that kind of exposure and safe setting, how can we transcend a lot of the limitations that, having a 2D screen in front of us just never allowed us to fully step into?
That's a great point. My take on it is also an economic barrier. It will allow people experience things that they couldn't normally experience, either because of economic reasons or even distance reasons, especially in education, right? Allowing kids all over the world to experience different parts of the world, to literally experience it as opposed to just watching a video. So I think that's one of the great powers of VR as well.
I totally agree. I mean, I think it was about 2.5 years ago, I started writing about one particular startup, Virtual Speech, which is a UK-based startup that initially the product allowed speakers to rehearse in VR, like, for example, in front of a TEDx setting or a major conference setting, and really feel exposed in that situation. And I suddenly, dawned on me, like, anyone soon will be able to walk with Socrates. You can have access to the best. You can be able to create whatever settings and situations you want, and with all sorts of devices that, no longer allow things to be separated from you only because of the money you have in your bank account or your location. It's absolutely transcendent. Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm sure you've tried many experiences. What's your current favorite one?
I'm a big supporter of LBE's location-based VR. I'm a very big fan of the most apt setting for premium experiences is these very high premium customized pods. So, for example, I was playing Quinoa's table football game recently, and basically they have the foosball table, but the top is covered, but you can enter with the VR and play with 3 other players. But you can also, hopefully in the future, also do tournaments and all sorts of things. But for example, in that situation, I'm very big into VR experiences that I can still visit socially in the real world. So those are the examples that I have on top of mind. There are some extreme sports games by Good Guys, I believe, is the company. They're Paris-based. And they have basically, I can step into a Formula One, be the sidekick sitting next to a Formula One driver, and as he speeds in, and I'm basically strapped into a chair that's moving volatilely left, right, all over the place with wind in my face, and really kind of has additional features to the experience that allows my body and my physicality to feel like it's part of it. Yeah, those are the top of mind. Anything VR arcade. Also, I was in London for, I'm not sure if the name is trending now, the nomenclature, but immersive theaters are starting to become a thing. So immersive productions, and basically in London there was an experience called Somni. I think it might be over with now. Basically, I was able to join 5 other individuals, go into a building that basically with VR as one of the devices, I was able to enter the subconscious and go into dreams and do the hero's journey thanks to VR.
But it was a social event, so you were with other people.
Yeah, the funny thing is with immersive theater, the cool thing is it's not just VR is not the only device. They mix it with a bunch of other things, and so you have actors and so on. And
so I'm assuming you've tried, and I don't know if they have it in Lisbon or not, but you've tried The Void?
I actually have not. It's very sad to say. I'm a huge Star Wars fan as well, but I hear lots of positive feedback about it.
It's amazing. I've tried it. We have one here. I work in Glendale, California, and we have one in the Glendale Gallery. Yeah, they have one in downtown Disney as well. And it's an amazing experience. Highly recommend it. I know they have one in New York where they do the Ghostbusters, and I wish I could do that maybe one day.
Very jealous. Very jealous.
Highly recommend it. If you ever come down here, you've got to try it out. So let's jump into our conversation. My audience is full of creators, developers, producers, people creating web. And, there are 2 types of experiences that you can create today. One is the native experience, meaning that you're using Unity or Unreal. And the other one is basically the web. And it kind of parallels web development versus client development like you used to in the old days, right? Where you create a Windows app versus creating a web app, right? It's kind of similar to that. So why don't we talk about the immersive web and exactly what does that mean and how is that different from just the regular web?
The immersive web essentially refers to WebVR. So the JavaScript API that I think, every time I go to conferences and I get people to raise their hands, it just keeps on increasing. The last one that I spoke at, it was the London Tech Accelerate event. It was about 50% of people put their hands up. And if I had done the same, request a year before, it was about maybe 15 to 25%. And if the year before, maybe it would be really scant. And so I think it's familiar more and more, but it's basically allows the JavaScript API basically allows you to load VR experiences on your browser. And so right now, I could share with you a URL, and that's all you need to load up a particular WebVR experience. It doesn't matter if you're using your phone or the browser on your laptop, or it doesn't even matter if you have a headset. It is basically known to be the platform that has the most mainstream appeal because it has the highest number of access points. It is all about democratic access. It's all about instantaneous loading. There's no friction points. So when we refer to the immersive web, we're already jumping one additional step of saying, basically, if I create all of these WebVR experiences and they're hosted on the web, then they're naturally destined to be interconnected like the traditional web. And so what's happening is basically the internet gets a whole new upgrade, a whole new facelift, where it becomes an interconnected array of 3D spaces.
Well, then the Oasis becomes to life, basically, because this immersive web would be the Oasis because it would be interconnected. And as the web is today, it is unlimited, right? It's not a particular size. It's everywhere. It's distributed and it's interconnected with everything else, and it keeps growing. So do you see that as the future of the immersive web?
Yeah, like for example, I was in California for a few months earlier this year, and I was able to hang out with some of my friends at Supermedium, which is a startup that is a VR browser. Do you know them?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yep.
So basically they were Y Combinator, Winter Batch, then they just recently, I think last week, closed their seed round. So that's a huge WebVR win, or a win for the WebVR community. But they're a browser that is completely, for the immersive web. They are the immersive web. They are basically, if I look at jumping into Supermedium, the app, and then you suddenly have all these interconnected WebVR experiences, then yes, it's a very, very early stage version of what you can entail with the Oasis. But what's cool about the immersive web is basically the immersive web community group, which basically is like a bunch of all the major vendors from Google, Samsung Internet, Mozilla, and others. They all work together on this API right now. Right now, it's basically really democratic in terms of having everyone's voices heard. And I think only Apple is the one that's even lagging to this day, even though they have a few people involved. But there are other things that the WebVR API will require to make the Oasis really come to life. For example, universal avatars, being able to have an avatar engine that allows you to take it with you like in a backpack and take it with you so that you can manifest in different experiences as you wish. These are the types of things, traversal linkings, what they call it, with being able to connect one experience to another. And so that like a portal, we can go in between them free and at our own volition. That's slowly becoming something that we can see happening, but it is still understandably early days.
What's going to be interesting is figuring out the discovery side of the web, the immersive web, right? Like today we use Google to discover things. I know Supermedium is trying to do something similar to that, right? Become sort of like the Google for WebVR. But I think the problem right now with the interconnection is also the discovery of these experiences. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I think there's going to be, they're just one company, and I suppose they're trying to do as much as they can. And they're doing it in a pretty smart way, step by step in their own direction, but they definitely need support from a lot more WebVR players in the scene, and hopefully more and more major players. Because what you're saying in terms of how distribution goes about, it is a tricky question. From my point of view, a lot of the early days will be depending on really good quality content that is extremely addictive and socially interesting, so that people go ahead and they just share with each other the URL on messengers and so on, and emails. Because that's ultimately how I think it'll start sticking. But discoverability at that point is just really peer-to-peer.
I mean, my take right now is that I think we're at a point where we were with the web with the blink tag, and people creating a lot of blink tags, you know what I mean? Websites that have these little blinking texts, and you go, oh, that's really cool. But I think we're there now with VR, and we have to move beyond that. And specifically, my take is into the enterprise and starting to use VR, and specifically WebVR, on the enterprise level to really make it a productive tool and something part of business. Because I think once that happens, just like the web, then it'll completely take off. What's your take on that?
I was hosting a WebVR panel. I'm trying to go to these conferences, and whenever I do, I try to organize a bunch of other people in the WebVR scene to come with me, and we do a panel to really like talk about the different, aspects of the whole technology and where it's going. But one of the panelists recently that I hosted was Danny Stefanik from LearnBright, if you know it. They're basically an education and training platform, 100% WebVR, and kind of quiet players because they've been commercially viable for quite some time now, and they launched even when it wasn't called WebVR, when we were still calling it primarily WebGL. Based products and platforms. So they're basically, they offer like an alternative to, boardrooms and, saving travel costs and so on is the benefit to enterprise users. You can go jump into a LearnBright simulation or scenario, and then you can do like a alternative to a Skype session where someone is, everyone's putting in files and so on into the VR setting and save that, leave, come back. It's all there. A lot of cool stuff. But the most interesting for me and the most telling is that 90% of their enterprise users aren't even ever using the VR content with a headset. 90% are basically, doing exactly what I think we all need to be aware of, which is they do find value in VR content even when they're not using a headset. And in this particular case, it's a commercially viable product, enterprise oriented, and it's saving money, and obviously showing a lot of value to these companies. And I think you're right in stating that probably the enterprise use case will be the most important one to tackle early on.
Let's talk about, you kind of mentioned with them that with this learning company, most of their users are not even using headsets. So that makes it that's one of the things that's kind of cool about WebVR and Immersive Web is that it is responsive, right? You don't need a headset. You can start at the desktop browser level, go into a mobile device, and then move up to the full experience VR in HMD. Do you want to touch a little bit upon that?
So I'm the used car salesman of the community. I'm not the technical guy. I don't develop anything. So I sometimes feel like a counterfeit, but talking about it enough, I feel like I can, go ahead and preach more. Progressive enhancement strategy is what the guys in the shop call it. It's how to bring value at every level of the experience, regardless of what kind of device you're using. And so, progressively enhance that value and progressively enhance the experience. And so that, for example, someone could play chess with me using their phone while I'm playing in a virtual simulated, forest and playing with them from there. It doesn't matter from if you're using a headset or not, the content should be valuable and offer value at any point. And it's kind of like how I've described it in a recent article, kind of like, learning how to swim, and then you go to a pool with a shallow end and a deep end. And I think what the industry's been trying to do for the past several years is just through game engines like Unity, require normal, ordinary Joes and Janes to jump in the deep end immediately. And so what WebVR does is allow you to kind of dip your toe in the shallow end, not with the headset, and then maybe with all of the progressively enhanced features that you can only experience with a headset. It's kind of like a bait. It can sort of bait you in. The content has value, and now here you can see other people who are using headsets are being able to do cooler and cooler things, or they have more freedoms. I don't know what the actual perk will be, but that's the gist of progressive enhancement. How do you create all carrot kind of bait for making people see the value in going ahead and getting a headset?
Yeah, definitely. That means ultimately the immersive web will just become the web, right? Like we don't have a mobile web. It's just the web, but I'm just browsing it on my mobile device. And when I go on the desktop, I have more features. So ultimately the immersive web, once this industry matures, it'll just be the web. And then depending on the device you're watching it through, right, you'll get a more enhanced experience.
I totally agree. I think what we should start to see, I would even say maybe as early next year, is a lot of corporate websites or major publishers of traditional websites to start experimenting by creating a WebVR layer, a WebVR version of their website, which then allows, thankfully, for Supermedium's VR browser to access it. So for example, if anyone is using the Supermedium browser, they're not going to be able to access normal 2D websites. Only if it's a WebVR version enabled website will they be able to load it up. So hopefully the message goes down that road, and we start to see a series of websites all kind of just pop up already in 3D.
Right. No, I completely agree with you on that. Yep. We're talking about the immersive web. It was known as WebVR, then it became WebXR. Now it's immersive web. So what's your take on what's going on? Does this mean from a development perspective that we kind of shouldn't commit fully yet because things are still changing, or are the basics in place? And because, I mean, the change from WebVR to WebXR was because they wanted to do AR, right? And then I heard now it's immersive web. So we're trying to keep all this straight. Should developers commit today to doing web VR development, or should they stay on hold and see what happens? What's your take?
Yeah, it's kind of like chicken and the egg in a way, a chicken and the egg situation, where if they wait, it's almost like the industry doesn't get there as fast. It's a very interesting kind of thing. If I say that, then it sounds like it's not ready at all. Of course, it sounds desperate. But the real fact is that if you create using a game engine, then you have basically a good decent chunk of people who are able to access the Unity game or an Unreal Engine game. But when you create something in WebVR, you instantly kind of potentially have access to billions of people, because anybody with a smartphone can access that content. And with progressive enhancement, they could be able to access that content with greater and greater immersion, exactly how you want it. And if you're really against WebVR because you think it's all about performance and the number of frames per second that WebVR is able to dish out isn't enough for you, like you're creating a Duke Nukem VR game or something like this, then WebVR still is valuable, because even these guys who do have these amazing VR experiences, high fidelity experiences, they still use 2D promotional content, which is just boggles my mind. They would use normal YouTube video, 2D video of just showing what it's like, but from a 2D way. And I'm just wondering, why don't they spend a little bit of extra energy and a little bit more of curiosity to check out whether a WebVR promo video would be useful even in supporting them. So I really think developers need to look at it from multiple angles, not necessarily either or, thinking whether it's going to be WebVR or Unity. I think even if they are 100% hardcore for Unity, they shouldn't look at WebVR as anything other than a natural complement that can support them as a marketing promo tool, or even a limited version of the game, and that then if they really stick to it, the user can go ahead and access the full game using Unity. But the real thing is, the alternative to WebVR entails way too much friction. I mean, you got to download these huge massive files. You got to install these things. You got to register. I mean, it's just way too much friction to expect mainstream users to adopt. And so I suppose it's all about, do you want someone to experience your game, your content? If so, WebVR should be part of your strategy.
Continue on with the game analogy. You're right. I mean, a full, Duke Nukem or whatever game you're probably going to create it for, Windows or Mac. And then if you can support that via a mobile game on the phone, right, that's more limited, or even a website. And the same goes with WebVR. Why not create a limited version of the game in WebVR that then helps you sell that full game that you're trying to sell? Or like they do today, right? You've got full-blown games that are for hardcore gamers, and then you've got casual games for the mobile device that are for more casual gamers. And that's just speaking only of gaming, not even talking about enterprise apps.
No, I completely agree. I just think, as a VR, AR developer, you have to be a dreamer. And as a dreamer, you have to use all of the resources you have available to you right now to make it happen. The market research firms, I blame them a lot. They, during the past few years, they've been, from my point of view, inflating adoption figures and then making us, basically arrive at this current state of mind where we feel like our expectations were let down and so on, which I don't believe is true, by the way, but we need to make it happen. And as the dreamers who are making it happen with creating these pieces of content, little pieces of the metaverse and whatever we're we're exploring, we need to use all the advantages we have. And WebVR offers way too many advantages for you to forgo.
Yeah, definitely. So what's your take on MR and specifically AR itself, right? Augmented reality. We talk about web and immersive web mainly in the context of virtual reality, fully immersive experience that blacks out the reality that you live in. But what about augmented reality? Not many people talk about AR and the web. What's your take? How do you see that as a future? How do you see MR in general?
In the examples I'm always thinking, I've always thought MR, AR, VR all in one thing. And whether you call it, spatial computing or mixed reality, like the example that I was using is like an IKEA product platform where you could be able to like go ahead and go into a VR showroom and look at all these different couches and then pick the couch you like and then toggle into the AR version of the experience and then, room scale that couch to see if it really works. And then you got VR and AR all working under one banner, one piece of content. But we're not there yet, of course. We don't have devices that can do both at the same time. So they are separate streams for the time being. That said, developers don't necessarily have to create, at least if it was WebXR, of course, they wouldn't have to necessarily create it as separate content. But the AR use case in and of itself, I totally agree that it has much more pervasive readiness for all sorts of industries, education, enterprise, everything. I mean, get stuck in the middle of the highway and you're alone, your engine's, not working, turn on the AR assistant guy to pop up and show you how to do it. I mean, there's just so many applications and so many ways to do it, but we are still in a period of time where it is about battery life and use cases that are sticky. So it really depends on the content. I have no doubts that I think next year we're going to start seeing use cases that go well above and beyond kind of the pseudo example of Pokemon Go, things that are really, really properly AR and really properly in e-commerce settings, for example, adding value. But it is hard to say. All I know is that it's absolutely correct to say that when you're talking about the VR branch of the same, mixed reality trunk, it's a smaller branch in terms of revenue and the number of users who immediately use it. But you're just, right now I have a phone next to me and it is completely AR ready pretty much. I mean, and so do you. And we could do something. It's all about content right now.
Right. Well, but I think AR is going to be really big in the enterprise. I think there are many applications you can use AR in the enterprise, which leads me to the question, yesterday Magic Leap just released their Leap 1 Creators Edition, right? That one, you obviously have to code for that itself using their API. Do you see, not specifically Magic Leap, because obviously we don't know what their business model is, we don't know the internals, but do you see something similar like Magic Leap that will allow us to code using the web?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just, there's no reason not to. And not just, the Magic Leap kind of examples of visual. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Bose AR, they have their own glasses, using spatial audio, augmented reality audio. So, for example, you're going into a museum and then based on these glasses and the proximity of different locations in a museum, you could do like a scavenger hunt. You could do all sorts of cool examples there. So the use cases are very, very wide and ready. It's all about whether the device can be connected to internet on a 24/7, setting. And I think that's the technical hurdle there. But there is absolutely no reason not to.
Right, definitely. Yep, makes sense. So what's your take on helping the VR and AR adoption industry-wise? If you had the power, what do you feel we could do to help that? Because ultimately, right, at this level, none of us should be competing with each other. We should all be helping each other out so that we can grow the market. Because otherwise, if we don't grow the market and we hold it all to our chest, it's going to hurt everybody.
So much of the attention right now is on the premium high fidelity content, and Unity reflects 2/3 of all that content. So I'm not going to be able to, as a WebVR, WebXR cheerleader, to say anything more on the web's role or potential role in being the mainstream platform. In terms of where we are right now in the landscape as it currently stands, I think location-based, particularly VR arcades, are the perfect setting for premium content, and actually developers need to start, I think, focusing on that particular setting and not the idea that, their premium games, especially if those games are in, or the content in particular, whatever they are, if they're sixth off or not. I don't think that the consumer household is a place to primarily assume will be the main place where people will access it, or want to access it. I think a lot of attention needs to be placed on developing content for VR location spaces. And I think next year we're going to see quite more of an explosion in the US. I mean, in Asia, VR arcades in particular have been going through a hell of a spike, up and down, of course, but very resilient. A lot of activity there, and that has its own reasons for being so. But in the US, it's about, I think, somewhere between 100 and 150 VR arcades. And I think that's going to probably spark next year. And so I would really recommend that if developers are catering to entertainment and not enterprise in particular, then they should focus on location-based. And for enterprise, I think nothing is pausing or stalling anything. I think go at it. I think businesses are more and more educated on what they can do with this new technology, AR and VR alike. Go as business normal. I think the inflection point, as SuperData released a little bit ago, I think a few months ago, they're stating that the inflection point is going to be 2019.
So do you think having standards solidified will help towards more adoption?
Absolutely would be the answer. I think solidarity on that front is extremely important, especially as content continuously iterates and the number of headsets keep on shuffling. I think standards that we all agree on, developers are working with, and have a mind for the future, make sure that everything is portable, not just right now and next year, but in 5 years from now. That's the real challenge. So I think having open standards that everyone agrees on is extremely important right now.
That makes total sense. I mean, I remember when I started my career, I started as a web developer. And I remember the pain in the butt it was to get, a website to run in every single iteration of Internet Explorer back then. And the different versions of Netscape and all that stuff. We become much more standardized now, where you still have to worry as a developer, but not as much as you did way at the beginning. And it kind of feels like right now with WebVR, we're kind of in that place. Obviously, things will solidify and you'll have a standard. But if web developers thought it was a pain in the butt to test out your stuff on multiple browsers on the desktop, then mobile came. Now add an HMD to that. So, hey, Amir, we're almost out of time, but I did want to get a couple more things from you. You are the co-founder of Virtuleap, so maybe quickly tell us what it is that about. What do you guys do?
When we first started in the sector, in VR and AR, we began as a hackathon, a global online hackathon platform. And we partnered with Mozilla and Samsung Internet and Google, particularly on the WebVR front, trying to catalyze content creators. We ran the first edition last year, and we just finished the second edition, I think, last week about now. And so the judges are basically judging the various concepts. But during the first edition, we kind of ran into a common complaint amongst a lot of developers, which was kind of like a criticism about some of the models that were appearing. For example, some of the monetization models were very disruptive and distracting, and they weren't really about the content. It was all about monetizing regardless. Like you're in a enchanted forest and suddenly you're stuck in a commercial about some ad or brand that had no, similarity to what the experience was. And so it made developers very resentful, and it kind of jeopardized potentially content creation in general if you keep on creating models that aren't really respecting the fidelity of content. So we went about basically as a company, we went about creating our own attention metric, or a metric that allows you to, as a developer or brand, understand how the flow of attention happens between users and 3D objects. And so we're basically just working from the point of view of a few steps backwards and figuring out what are the new native metrics that need to be created for driving monetization and the user experience from a various number of angles.
I see. So, to simplify it, Google Analytics for VR.
Yeah, exactly. Or even maybe simpler is the Google PageRank of VR and AR.
Right. And it's interesting, right? Because I think that's the other thing we need to tackle specifically. Again, I'm coming from a focus on enterprise versus gaming, but even gaming uses a lot of analytics to figure out what works and what doesn't. But from the enterprise, you always need these kinds of analytics to make decisions, business decisions. And I think that's the other part that we need to tackle from the WebVR or VR in general, is standardizing analytics in a way to get information from the experience to the business decision makers.
Absolutely. I think some of the things that we missed going into the industry a few years ago or several years ago is we copied and pasted a lot of the ways, the best practices, the metrics from the traditional digital industry. And we assumed by copying and pasting, we could just make them work also in a 3D setting. And I think that's not completely true. And I think we need to get going on figuring out what are the right best practices and metrics and standardized ways of doing business in a setting that involves an additional dimension.
Well, finally, I have one last question, which I ask all my guests is, you have the full power and control over VR. What would you like VR to be 10 years from now?
There's a novel I just can't remember the name of, but it was almost like all these emerging technologies became so seamless into our daily lives in the future that it's almost like they're almost like ghosts. They're almost like invisible, and they come in and out. And I think with VR and AR, we're looking at these clunky devices and gear. I would love to see them minimize continuously until, like, in 10 years, maybe it's crazy to say, but who knows, in 10 years, it's almost like putting on these very light lenses that can allow us to transport into whatever world we want to conjure up. In educational settings, being able to actually enliven the educational system, so kids can immediately just jump into the atoms in a molecular world and then out into space, and kind of all my regrets for the past and how things could have been improved with things like the education system and doing business. I think the world will become extremely globalized and much more optimistic place to live in with this type of technology.
Amen to that. Excellent. Well, Amir, unfortunately, we're completely out of time. I really want to thank you for being on the podcast today. This was a truly enjoyable conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, Marcelo.
If people want to get a hold of you, do you want to give them your email or Twitter or whatever you like?
Yeah, sure. The company website is virtuleap.com, and my email is amir@virtuleap.com. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I'm very open to meeting new people, seeing what you guys are up to, and really just exploring ways to collaborate.
Well, thanks again, Amir. To the rest of you, I'm glad you were here with me. If you enjoyed this podcast, please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and like us on iTunes or SoundCloud. For more episodes, check out howtocreatevr.com/iTunes or howtocreatevr.com/SoundCloud. If you'd like to watch video interviews and how-to tutorials all about VR and AR, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at howtocreatevr.com/YouTube. If you are ever in the Southern California area, we have a monthly meetup with lots of great VR and AR presentations. You can join or RSVP for our next meetup at howtocreatevr.com/meetup. Finally, if you are interested in learning more about how to create VR, AR, and MR experiences, please visit howtocreatevr.com. So until the next episode, I'm your host, Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.